Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. In this episode of the podcast, we are exploring Buddhi, Chitta and Manas. And this, of course, is an Indic exploration of the brain and mind. I am, as a neuropsychiatrist, fascinated by how Indian philosophy thinks about the brain and mind. And today, we delve into a journey on how the Indian philosophical mind was never just one mind, but a layered living orchestra. Today, we talk about the mind not as a single monolith, but as three instruments playing different roles. We'll trace how memory stores, Chitta, how the senses process, Manas, and how discernment decides, Buddhi, not across just one school of thought, but four: Advaita, Buddhism, Sankhya, and Dvaita. This isn't about fixing the mind, it's about understanding it, where the self begins, ends, and maybe doesn't exist at all. Let's talk about Buddhi first. When we talk about Buddhi, we mean the higher intellect. It's the faculty of discrimination, reasoning, judgment, and decision making. The Buddhi guides the mind, Manas, and it resolves conflicts by adopting higher choice. It reflects pure consciousness when purified, and it has a spiritual role of being the gateway to liberation through clarity. A neuroscience parallel of the Buddhi is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our executive functions. Now, if you're watching the visual guide to the podcast, you'll be able to see the prefrontal cortex and which part of the brain it occupies. The Chitta is the storehouse of memory. It's our deep, unconscious mind. It's the repository of our various impressions, samskaras and vasanas. It conditions thought, behavior, and the continuity of our personality. The Chitta retrieves past experiences and helps us shape present decisions. It has a spiritual role. The stilling of the Chitta vritti is essential for realization. A neuroscience parallel is in the hippocampus and the medial temporal lobe, our memory store and the hothouse of human emotional generation as well. The Manas, on the other hand, is the coordinating mind. It's a sensory motor coordinator and it processes the inputs of the lower mind. Our doubts, desires, oscillations, what we call the restless monkey mind, is the Manas. It acts as an interface between the senses and the higher faculties. It needs discipline, often through meditation, in order to become calm and clear. The neuroscience parallel to the Manas is the thalamus and limbic system, the areas which are responsible for our working memory. Again, I'd remind you to look at the visual guide to the podcast if you want to have a reference to the parts of the brain that we are talking about. In summary, therefore, let's just understand what Buddhi, Chitta and Manas are. Buddhi has a role as the decision maker and the intellect. A metaphor for the Buddhi is the judge or the sword. Chitta has a role in memory and unconscious impressions. The metaphor for it is the archive or the reservoir. Manas has a role as a sense coordinator and a processor of input. The metaphor for the Manas is as a clerk or as an interface. Your mind, therefore, is not just one voice, it's a committee. The Manas reacts to sensory inputs. The Chitta recalls past impressions. The Buddhi decides what to do. Your mind, therefore, in Indic philosophy, is a courtroom. When the judge is asleep, the clerk and the archive run the show. Let's look at the four philosophies that we are exploring today, understand them a little bit, and then come back to talk about Buddhi, Chitta, and Manas in the context of these philosophies. Sankhya is the oldest Indic philosophy. It is based on the concept of dualism. There is a Purusha, pure consciousness, and Prakriti, nature, and these two are co-eternal. There are therefore many Purushas, many selves, each a passive witness. And bondage is because we misidentify the Purusha with the Prakriti's evolutes. And liberation, Kaivalya, happens through discriminative knowledge or Viveka, when you are able to distinguish the Purusha from the Prakriti's evolutes. Now let's try and work through this using an analogy of a mirror. The Purusha is a clear mirror, pure consciousness. The Prakriti's evolutions are the reflections, body, mind, and emotions. Bondage is when you mistake the reflection for reality. For example, I am anxious, identifying with the emotion and not with the awareness. Let's use another analogy, that of a dream. The Purusha is the dreamer, the unchanging witness. The Prakriti's evolutes are the dream world, the projections. Bondage is getting elated or terrified by the dream. An example, therefore, is the waking life is also mistaken for ultimate reality. In essence, therefore, in Sankhya philosophy, bondage is I am this body, mind, role, or emotion. Freedom comes from the realization that I am the witnessing consciousness, untouched by Prakriti's evolutes. Now let's move on to talk about Advaita Vedanta. This is the philosophy of non-dualism, a philosophy which says that only Brahman is the ultimate real. In Advaita Vedanta, the Atman and the Brahman are not considered separate, and hence the saying Tattvamasi, that thou art, or you are that. The world is considered an appearance, Maya, empirically real but not ultimately separate. And bondage comes out of ignorance, avidya, identifying oneself with the body or the mind. So you're not your body, you're not your mind, is what Advaita Vedanta teaches. Liberation or moksha is through knowledge or jnana of the true nature of Brahman, Satchidananda, Satchit Ananda. And therefore, let's take an example. Svetaketu returns home after 12 years of study, and this is from the Upanishads. He is arrogant with scriptural learning at this time. His father, Uddalaka, asks, "Did you learn that knowledge by which all is known?" A rather profound question. Uddalaka shows him a lump of clay. And he says, by knowing one lump, all clay objects are known. Pots, bowls, toys. The names differ. The essence is the same. The teaching that comes out of this experience is that diversity is an appearance. The essence is one. There's another example that Uddalaka talks about. Salt, when dissolved in water, becomes invisible. Uddalaka asks Svetaketu, "Can you see it?" And Svetaketu says, "No. But every sip of water is now tasting salty." The teaching that comes from this is that the unseen essence pervades all existence. Uddalaka explains that subtle essence, what remains unseen, is the truth. It is the self, Atman, present in all. Tattvamasi, that thou art, Svetaketu, he says. So the essence of the story is that there is unity behind diversity, the example of the clay and pots. There is a pervasive essence, salt in water. There is no separate Atman and Brahman, that thou art. Tattvamasi, and realization dissolves ignorance and arrogance. I found Advaita a rather difficult and complex philosophy to wrap my head around, and I suspect that, like many talks on Advaita, this podcast too will demand that you listen not once, but more than once attentively in order to understand. Indeed, Advaita has this very unique way of appearing to be understood, only to be forgotten thereafter. And one needs to return to these concepts over and over again in order to wrap one's head around them. At least that's my experience. Let's now talk about Buddhism, another great philosophy that emerged from India through the Buddha. Buddhism is based on 4 noble truths: that the world is made up of suffering. One needs to understand the cause of suffering. One needs to work towards the cessation of suffering. And for this, one needs to adopt the Eightfold Path. And if you'd like to understand a little more about Buddhism, I draw you to my podcast, The Mandala in Your Mind, where we talk about the Buddha and his essential teachings. Now, Buddhism is based on the concept of dependent origination, or pratitya samutpada. The idea is that everything arises in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions, and nothing exists independently or in isolation. Everything, therefore, is an interdependent reality. Buddhism explains the concept of no-self, anatman, through the lens of the 5 aggregates, the skandhas. The self, Buddhism says, is nothing more than these ever-changing physical and mental processes, none of which can be taken as an eternal essence. In Buddhism, the concept of impermanence is extremely important. Impermanence is referred to as anicca. All phenomena are considered transient, and liberation or nirvana can be achieved through wisdom, ethics, and meditation. Let's take the example of Kissa Gautami. She loses her only child, and overcome by grief, she carries the body door to door, begging for someone to bring the child back to life. She begs for medicine to bring the child back to life. Everyone pities her, but no one is able to help her. Finally, she is directed to the Buddha. The Buddha tells her something very simple. Please bring me mustard seeds from a house that is untouched by death, and we will bring your child back to life. She thinks that's easy. She goes from house to house, asking for mustard seeds. While every house offers seeds, all of them have known death. She realizes that no house is free from loss, and that suffering is universal and not unique to her. She accepts the impermanence of human existence. She lays her child to rest, and she finds peace in understanding shared human suffering, and this draws her back to the Buddha, and she becomes his disciple. The Buddha therefore teaches the marga, suffering, or the path. Suffering is universal. Cause is attachment and ignorance. Cessation is possible by letting go. The path is ethics, a life built on ethics, meditation, and wisdom. The essence of the story from the Buddha is that the 4 noble truths are embodied in our life and experience. There is a dependent origination to much of our experiences. There is no self. Suffering is shared and not isolated. We must understand the impermanence of all phenomena. Everything is transient. And nirvana, walking this path, leads to liberation. The Buddha was so clear about impermanence and detachment that he actually said, "I'm like a boat that you need to cross the river. You don't need me when you get to the other side." Unlike many New Age gurus, the Buddha therefore did not expect permanent followership. He did not want you to always walk his path. He wanted you to be detached from even that path. Let's then move on to understand Dvaita Vedanta. Dvaita is based on dualism. God, Vishnu, and souls, jivas, and matter, prakriti, are eternally distinct. God in Dvaita Vedanta is considered a supreme, independent, and a personal reality. Souls are plural, there are several of them, millions indeed, dependent, and inherently different from God. The world in Dvaita Vedanta is not Maya, unlike in Advaita. It's not an illusion. The world is considered real. Bondage comes from samsara due to ignorance and karma. Liberation is achieved by God's grace and devotion, bhakti. Eternal bliss being achieving a state of being near God. Let's look at the story of Ramanuja. Guru Goshti Purna teaches Ramanuja the mantra Om Namo Narayana. He warns, keep it a secret. Revealing it will condemn you to hell. Only the initiated may receive it. Ramanuja reflects, if this mantra can liberate souls, how can I withhold it? He climbs the temple tower and calls out, all of you hear the divine name that grants liberation. And he chants Om Namo Narayana. The Guru is furious. You disobeyed. You will burn in hell. Ramanuja bows humbly. If my suffering saves countless souls, let me go to hell. The core teaching in Dvaita is that Vishnu, God, is supreme, independent, and a personal deity. The souls, jivas, like us, are plural, eternally distinct, and dependent on God, dependent on Vishnu. The world, Prakriti, is real. It's created by God and not an illusion. It is not Maya. Our bondage comes from samsara through karma and ignorance. Liberation is not by self-knowledge alone. Liberation is attained only by God's grace through devotion, bhakti, eternal bliss being near God, not identify with Him. Ramanuja in this story embodies compassion, the willingness to suffer for others. Souls are dependent on God's grace, and liberation comes by devotion and surrender. The Dvaita vision, therefore, is eternal nearness to God and not merging with God. Not quite like the concept of Atman and Brahman being one, indeed quite opposite to that concept. Now let's look at Buddhi, Chitta and Manas, the instruments of the mind, using a cross-tradition lens. Antakarana in Indic tradition is your inner toolkit. It is composed of Manas, which filters and reacts to sensory input, Chitta, that stores impressions and emotional residue, Ahamkara, which forms an identity through I thoughts, really that's our ego, and Buddhi, that discerns, decides and guides action. Now across traditions, when you view this, Sankhya sees them as nature's tools, separate from the self. Advaita views them as reflections, not the true self. Everything Advaita says is Maya. Buddhism treats them as momentary, interdependent processes. Dvaita channels them towards devotion and surrender. And Yoga stills Chitta to reveal Buddhi's clarity. Different schools, therefore, tune the mind's instruments differently, but awakening lies in knowing who's playing them. Pause and reflect. Is it your manas reacting? Your chitta repeating the past? your ahamkara swelling with pride, or your buddhi guiding with wisdom? Which aspect of your mind is active today? Now let's look at Buddhi, Chitta and Manas and how they evolved in Indic tradition. Sankhya, as I mentioned, is India's most ancient dualist philosophy. It sees the mind as part of Prakriti, nature, and not the Purusha, which is the pure self. Buddhi is the first evolute. It emerges as intelligence or discriminative faculty. Ahamkara follows, giving rise to ego and the sense of I. Manas then emerges to manage sensory inputs and thoughts. Chitta stores impressions and samskaras, shaping future tendencies. None of these are you. The true self, Purusha, remains the silent observer, untouched by the drama of the mind. So unlike Buddhism or Advaita, Sankhya does not deny the structure of the mind. It builds it. But it also doesn't claim liberation through intellect, only through disidentification. When something pulls you emotionally, can you pause and ask, is this my nature, Prakriti, or am I the witness, Purusha? Please reflect. Yoga, as described by Patanjali, builds on Sankhya but introduces the idea of discipline and integration. The mind is not just to be observed, it is to be refined. The key phrase, therefore, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, yoga is the cessation of fluctuations in Chitta, is really a very good summation of what yoga does. Chitta holds impressions, vrittis, that disturb clarity. Manas is the processor of sensory input. It must be stilled. Buddhi gains clarity only when Chitta is calm. Liberation in yoga is therefore not disassociation, but a mastery over the mind's movements. And unlike Advaita, which negates the mind, or Dvaita, which surrenders it, yoga seeks to discipline the inner instruments until they become transparent to the self. Ask yourself, what repetitive thoughts or emotional echoes dominate your inner landscape? Can you witness them without feeding them? I'd like to take the opportunity also to remind you about my Brain, Mind and Yoga podcast, the dialogue we had with Professor Shivarama Varamballi of Nimhans. You'll probably find that very, very interesting to listen to as a corollary to this podcast. In Buddhism, especially the Yogacara tradition, the mind isn't a static structure. It's a flow. There is no permanent self, no eternal thinker, just a series of mental events. Chitta is the stream of consciousness, ever shifting like water. Manas in Yogacara represents the subtle ego, clinging, a constant grasping at me and mine. Buddhi as a term doesn't appear directly, but prajna, wisdom, plays a similar role, cutting through delusion. Unlike Sankhya's fixed hierarchy or yoga's layered refinement, Buddhism offers a radical idea. These components don't exist inherently, they arise dependent on causes and can be let go. In Buddhism, therefore, the mind isn't a palace to be cleaned, it's a river to be released. In Advaita, the inner instruments, Buddhi, Chitta and Manas, are seen as reflections within the field of consciousness, not the self itself. Advaita says you are not your thoughts, emotions or even your intellect. You are the Sakshi, the witness beyond them. Buddhi functions as the mirror, reflecting the light of consciousness, Chiddabhasa, allowing temporary discernment. Chitta is the storehouse of karmic impressions, vasanas, which color perception. Manas interacts with the senses, sustaining duality through choices and comparison. Here, in Advaita, unlike Sankhya's dualism or Buddhism's anatta, Advaita asserts a non-dual self that pervades and transcends all mental functions. The goal isn't to still the mind or observe its flow, but to disidentify with it entirely. Can you witness your thoughts without being them? Can you see the mirror and still know you are the light? Advaita therefore tells you that the mirror is not the light. In Dvaita, Buddhi, Chitta and Manas are not merely tools for insight. They are vehicles for service, surrender and divine connection. Unlike Advaita's detachment or Buddhism's dissolution, Dvaita affirms a clear duality. You are the soul and God is the supreme other. Manas is disciplined to focus on devotional acts, ritual, prayer and mantra. Chitta is purified through constant remembrance, smarana, and faith, storing sacred impressions. Buddhi is aligned not toward liberation through self-enquiry, but through devotional discernment, knowing right from wrong in God's service. Here, ego, ahamkara, isn't destroyed, but is humbled in the presence of the divine. The mind becomes a temple, its instruments offered in devotion. What if your thoughts, memories and choices were all offerings and not obstacles? Dvaita reminds us the mind doesn't have to be transcended, it can be sanctified. Now there is a very unique concept that is a refinement of Dvaita and indeed of Advaita, Vishishta Advaita or qualified non-dualism, which sees the soul as distinct yet inseparable from the divine, like a spark to a fire or a drop of water to the ocean. Here, Buddhi, Chitta and Manas are not negated or bypassed. They are refined and harmonized to support loving union, bhakti yoga, with the Supreme Being. Manas is engaged in meditative repetition, keeping the senses aligned with devotion. Chitta retains impressions of sacred texts, divine names and spiritual experiences. Buddhi supports surrender by recognizing the soul's dependence on divine grace. Unlike Dvaita, Vishishta Advaita suggests a subtler connection, not complete separation, not full oneness. The inner instruments become bridges rather than barriers. Can your thoughts, memories and insights deepen relationship rather than dissolve identity is what Vishishta Advaita asks us to think about. We therefore have the same instruments but different interpretations. Buddhi, Chitta and Manas have by now shown up in many roles: tools of evolution, flow, reflection, devotion and surrender. Each tradition offers not just a model of the mind but a path to liberation. Sankhya engineers the mind as part of nature. Disidentify and observe, it says. Yoga disciplines the mind. Refine the chitta, steady manas, sharpen the buddhi, it says. Buddhism deconstructs the mind. Let go of all identity, even the subtle ones. Advaita rejects identification. Mind is illusion. Witness alone is real. Dvaita sanctifies the mind, asks you to purify it and offer it to God. Vishishta Advaita harmonizes the mind, refines it to become a bridge to the divine. Though the tools are named the same, their function changes based on the destination: freedom, union, or surrender. What is your mind becoming as we go through this journey? A mirror, a river, a ladder, or an offering? Ask yourself the question. Now that we've explored how Buddhi, Chitta and Manas are interpreted across these philosophies, it's time to turn inward. Let's try this brief guided reflection. Ask yourself, a thought arises. Who noticed it? A memory surfaces. Where did it come from? An emotion stirs. Who's feeling it? A decision presents itself. Who's choosing it? As Sankhya observes it, as Advaita disidentifies from it, as yoga disciplines it, as Dvaita devotes it, each tradition leads us to the same insight. You are not the content of the mind. You are the one aware of it. When you meet a thought, don't ask what it says. Ask who is listening. It's not enough to know Buddhi, Chitta and Manas. We must learn to realign them consciously. Across traditions, certain practices emerge as universal tools. The Buddhi can be sharpened through self-inquiry, scriptural study and reflection, as per Advaita and Sankhya. The Chitta can be cleansed via meditation, mantra, prayer or emotional processing. Yoga, Dvaita and Vishishta Advaita provide the examples. The Manas can be steadied with breathwork, sensory restraint and mindful habits. Yoga and Buddhism have a lot to say about this. These tools differ in form but converge in intention to liberate the self from the chaos of the inner instruments. Ask yourself, which instrument in your mind needs tuning today? Discernment, memory or attention? If the mind is an orchestra, these tools are your tuning keys. Try and make each note count. What does it mean to live with Buddhi, Chitta and Manas in harmony? Each tradition gives us a lens, but you build the practice. In your work, let Buddhi lead with clarity and ethics. In relationships, cleanse your Chitta, release your past impressions, forgive, remember wisely. In your routines, steady Manas, avoid distraction, live deliberately. When aligned, these instruments don't just function, they flow. Your choices become conscious, your reactions gentler, your presence deeper. And if you'd like to understand the neuroscience of calming the mind, I would invite you to listen to the Monk's Brain podcast, where we have looked at this in great detail. The goal is not to silence the mind, but to conduct its symphony with awareness. After exploring Buddhi, Chitta and Manas across traditions, we return to one essential truth. You are not the mind, you are the one who sees it. The Sankhya seer watches the mind from afar. The yogi disciplines it to stillness. The Buddhist lets it go like clouds. The Advaitin dissolves it in silence. The Bhakta sanctifies it with love. The integrator lives through it, not as it. Whatever your path, liberation begins with this insight. The mind is not the problem. It is the unquestioned ownership of it that binds you. When the mind becomes the servant of awareness, life becomes a graceful unfolding, not a mental struggle. Can you live your life with your mind as a companion, not the commander? Do reflect. The Buddha taught us in the Dhammapada, verse 1, all phenomena are preceded by the mind, ruled by the mind, made of the mind. In simple words, you are nothing but your mind. What you think, you become. Freedom, therefore, begins in the mind. By transforming it, we can transform our lives. Thank you for joining us on this journey to spiritual freedom. Until next time, be well, be mindful, be free. And please remember that the Neurokrish Immersion is available on Apple, Spotify, with a video guide on YouTube. Do like, follow, and subscribe to us, and do tell your friends about us. Thank you for listening.